This video and all of its contents, including any opinions expressed by the narrator, are strictly for entertainment purposes only and is not intended in any way as a substitute for professional services and consultation from a licensed therapist, doctor, attorney, or other licensed professional service provider. Each person must make their own life decisions, and those decisions are theirs. Welcome back to Find Your Alpha. I'm back at you this week with another terrific video story. This one is titled Cheating Wife Schemed to Get My Money, but I Foiled Her Plan. And she says, I deserve at least half, right? And the husband says, no, not this time. So let's get into this story and see what it's all about. He starts off and he says, last March I won $150,000 on a scratch-off ticket. I bought it at a gas station where I go to lunch a few times a week. Now, two things about that. Number one, $150,000. I didn't know you could win that kind of money on a scratch-off ticket. And number two, what are you doing going to a gas station for lunch? He says, I usually go and get my sandwich and an MD. So I'm assuming that MD means Mountain Dew. And always buy either a $2 or a $5 ticket. I sit in my car, eat my food, and check my tickets. If I win, I go back inside to cash, but that rarely happens, and if it does, it's normally for $10 or $20. The most I'd ever won before was $200, and all total, I'd probably lost north of $2,000 on lottery tickets before this win. Lesson here, guys. Don't play the lottery, because there's very few people that are going to be winning these big jackpots like this guy. When I scratched off this one, I thought it was for $150. I went in and used the restroom, then went over and handed it to one of the checkout girls. She looked at it and said, oh my God, you won one of the big prizes. I said, nah, and she said, yeah, huh? I almost passed out. I couldn't believe it, as all my life I've never had good luck on anything. The first thing I did after that was call my boss and ask for the rest of the day off so I could deal with the lottery people. He told me yes, but if he didn't, I would have quit over the phone cause $150,000 is more than I make in 3 years. I stuck around the station for the next couple hours as the clerks called the lottery people to find out how I get paid. Yeah, I'd like to know how you get paid too on that, because there's no way they could pay you out of the register $150,000. You probably have to get a check in the mail or maybe go to the lottery commission to get paid. That's a good question. He says, I recorded everything and didn't want to leave until I made sure I did everything was done right. I've gotten to know the clerks there pretty well over the years, but I didn't want to take any chances. I don't blame you. When I got paid out, I gave them $1,500 cash to split up amongst the 5 of them that worked there. Well, that was a nice tip. That night, I told my girlfriend and proposed to her. Oh boy. I'd been thinking about that for a while, but held off because of money. Now that wasn't an issue anymore. She accepted and we got married at the end of May down in Charleston. She and I met in late 2021 and had been sharing an apartment for the past 7 months prior to the marriage. Now, he doesn't specify how long they dated before they moved in together, but from what I'm reading into this, he rushed things, which is something you never want to do. He says, I loved her and wanted to spend the rest of my life with her. She's beautiful, and I felt it was the right time to marry and start a family as we were both 26 then, and I didn't want to wait too long to do that. With the money, I gave my parents $10,000, my little brother $5,000, and bought my grandma a new kitchen appliances. So we bought her all new appliances. I bought my wife a $4,000 wedding ring and also paid for our wedding and honeymoon in South Carolina. The remaining $94,000 I put into 4 different funds at the Charles Schwab office. Good for you. Put that money away when you're young because it's going to continue to compound as you get older. He says the advisor calculated that even if I never put in another dime in the account, by the time I turned 62, that money would grow to over $900,000. Not bad for a guy with no college degree. Well, listen, you don't have to have a college degree to do well in life. In fact, some of the most brilliant people out there don't have college degrees. And guess what? They also don't have any college debt. Even before I won the lottery, I've always been a saver. I had almost $11,000 in my 401k and a few $1,000s in an emergency fund. One of the things that attracted me to my wife was she was a saver too. Like me, she comes from humble beginnings and wasn't into buying stuff she couldn't afford. Well, that's good. Heck, when we met, she didn't even have a credit card and was still driving the old beater her dad bought her when she graduated. Again, that sounds good. She works full time and makes about $35,000 a year when you include her overtime. He says between the two of us, we bring in almost $80,000 in 2023. It's not a fortune, but it's more than enough to cover our expenses and way more than our parents earned when they were our age. Things were going fine with us until this past Thanksgiving when she started acting off. So here's where things start going left of center. The whole day she was like zoned out somewhere. She seemed to perk up after that, but then on Christmas night she snapped at me for not buying her more presents. What happened to that humble girl that didn't spend a lot of money? I let her pick out what she wanted, so I didn't understand why she was mad. She told me she expected I would get her those gifts and something else, then called me a cheap bastard. What? She never talked to me like that before, and I called her out on it. Good, you definitely call somebody out when they're talking to you like that because there's no reason for it. She apologized and made up with me, but from that point on, she was never the same person. She got very moody and snappy with me, and I was always walking on eggshells every time I was around her. I talked to her parents and they said they noticed it too, and her mom said she was going to talk to her about it. She did that, and when my wife came home after they talked, she called me every name in the book. She locked herself up in the bedroom and didn't come out until she left for work the following morning. I left after she did and came home early to talk to her because I wasn't going to put up with it anymore. Again, good for you. Don't let anybody pull that kind of shit on you. When she came through the door, she was on her cell phone smiling and giggling. But when she saw me, her face turned to stone. I wonder why. And she told the person she was talking to that she had to go because her husband was home. She told me it was one of her coworkers asking her about something. I didn't question her further about it, but that incident stuck in my craw. She asked me what I was doing home so early. I told her she was making me miserable and she had to stop it now or I was going to leave her. Good, you're not putting up with any BS. She looked surprised, then broke down crying and told me she was sorry and that something was happening with her mind that was making her crazy and she didn't know what it was. She said she thinks she might have some kind of hormonal problem or something. I don't know about that. After talking a while, she agreed to make an appointment to see a medical doctor to find out what was going on. My cousin goes to the doctor regularly and recommended her doctor, and he was able to work her in the following week. The doctor checked her out and ordered all the blood tests and such, and everything came back fine with the exception of her platelets being a little low, but the doctor said that wouldn't have any significant impact on a person's mental health. He recommended she see a therapist, suggesting that perhaps she was suffering from depression and the therapist could help her work through it. She started going to the therapist and has been seeing her once a week ever since. She says it's been helping her, but I didn't see any difference. The only change I noticed was she wasn't snapping or having any outburst anymore, but she was still acting distant and our ex-life became non-existent. Huge red flag when they're distant like that and looking off in another world and she's not giving you anything in the bedroom. Huge red flag. I put up with this for about a month, but then witnessed something that set me off in another direction. One afternoon, I again got home before she did and decided I would have dinner ready when she walked through the door. I heard her car pull up and went over to peek out to see if it was her. It was, so I went back to the kitchen to continue getting stuff ready. A few minutes go by and she still hadn't come in, but I could hear her talking to someone outside. I go back over to the window and see her on her cell phone laughing and smiling ear to ear. So here she is again on her phone, laughing and talking with someone. It was like I was looking at a different person. She showed no signs of depression and was having a good old time talking to this person. I couldn't hear everything that was said, but I did make out part of the conversation where she was telling the person she just got home and they had time and don't be chicken. Now I wonder who she was saying that to. He says, I decided to jerk open the door and startle her. She was startled and told the person on the other end that her husband was home and she had to go. She then said something like, leave it on my desk and I'll take care of it. Okay, bye. Now my suspicions were really high, as I knew from her reaction and body language she was not talking to someone about work. I asked her who she was talking to, and she told me it was a supervisor from another department and she was going to help him figure something out. The OP says, "Him, huh? Okay, now I'm really suspicious, and you should be." She kissed me, which was something she hadn't done much over the past couple months, and asked me why I was home. I told her we finished up early and I came home to fix us a nice dinner. She said, "Aw, kiss me again," and we went inside. We ate and talked a little during dinner, but after that she went back to being a zombie again. Like she wanted to be somewhere else. That's because she did want to be somewhere else. At that point, I just knew there was something else afloat. She was like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and I was never sure which one I'd get. You're probably getting a lot of the Mr. Hyde, is what I'm assuming. That night while she slept, I got her phone and tried getting into it, but she had changed the password. This was a flashing red light, as she'd never done that before. Yeah, that's a huge flashing red light or a red flag, whatever you want to call it. She uses facial recognition, but I didn't risk holding it so close to her as I was afraid she'd wake up. The next day, I thought about everything, and on my way home that evening, I called an old buddy of mine that I hadn't seen in a few years. He's an overnight security guard at the Native American Casino and does investigations on the side. He wants to get into PI work full time, but for now, he's working the guard job to pay the bills. We met the next day after I got off work and before he started his overnight shift at the casino. I explained the situation and what I needed, and he told me his capabilities and the fee. He said he'd do it for 1 month, and if he found nothing, he wouldn't charge me. And if he did find something and provided me with hard evidence, then I'd owe him $2,500. I thought that was a good deal, so we shook on it, and he got to work the next morning. The first thing he wanted to do was to check her devices, so that afternoon I met him at the apartment before my wife got home. He was able to get into her tablet pretty quickly, but we didn't find anything on there. He said she was probably doing everything from her phone and we needed to get into it somehow. He showed me what to look for if I was able to get my hands on it when she left it unattended. A few days later, she left her phone in her coat when she went in to take a shower after getting home late from work. Now, I don't know what kind of job she has, but why is she going into the shower right after she's getting home? That's another red flag as far as I'm concerned. He says I was able to get into it as it hadn't locked up yet. I looked through all her messages and didn't find anything, then took pictures of all her apps as my buddy instructed, then put the phone back in her coat. The next morning, I sent him the list of apps to him to see if anything clicked. He looked it over and asked if I ever used Signal. I said no, I've never heard of it, and neither did I before this story. He said, "Bro, she's cheating on you or doing something underhanded as people don't use Signal unless they're hiding something and she's using it." I was upset but not surprised as at that point as my senses knew something was up. A few days after this, he called to let me know he had something solid and wanted to show me. When we met, he told me that he had tailed my wife on 3 separate occasions to the parking lot of a hospital in the next town over from us. I thought hospital, maybe she was visiting a sick person. Negatory, he says. He said she's been meeting up with a guy in the parking lot who drives an older model F-150 extended cab. She arrives first, parks, then goes into the lobby and waits for him. He arrives and parks in the back of the lot and then gets out and gets in the back seat. She then walks out to his truck and gets in the back. They stay in there for 30 to 40 minutes. She then gets out and goes to her car, and a few minutes after that, he gets out and gets in the front seat and drives away. You see all the planning that goes into these affairs? Unbelievable. He got video of them coming and going and getting in and out of the truck, but no close-ups, but it's obvious what they were doing in there. Seeing the video really messed me up, and I had to step away to keep myself together before looking at anything else. When we got back to it, my buddy gave me a full rundown on the guy. He's around our age and works at her company. He's a supervisor of some sort, but doesn't supervise her and works in another department. He's unmarried, but lives with a woman, and they have a toddler-aged child who shares his last name. So this guy's a total dog. What a creep. He told me he was sorry to be the one to break this to me and assured me he'd keep working on it to get me even more proof, but I had all I needed right there. He advised me to consult with an attorney right away as cheating spouses often end up draining bank accounts and I needed to safeguard my assets pronto. That's good advice here from his friend. The next afternoon, I was able to get an appointment with an attorney after work. I told him my main concern were my accounts, specifically the one at Schwab and my 401k. Now listen to this. He said I should be okay on both since I set them up and funded them before we got married. Interesting. Also, the Schwab account was only in my name as I hadn't gotten around to adding her yet. He says, whew, hearing that was a big relief. He told me it was unlikely I'd have to give up anything from those accounts, but I should expect to pay some settlement amount and 1 to 2 months of alimony, even though we'd been married less than 2 years. As for the cheating, he said that won't come into play here as we live in a no party at fault state. So this is a no fault state where this poor guy lives. He did want all the evidence though, stating we might have to use it if she tries to pull something or make a false claim about me. He said it's a shame you have to think that way, but said I'd be surprised what women say and do when they're on the ropes. And that's the end of his original post. Now this was a very odd ending to this post, but now he does come back and we're going to get to that. But before we take a look at that, if you've liked what you've heard so far and you want to help out the channel, hit that like button. That will help get this video seen all over the planet and also help move this video up on the YouTube algorithm. Now let's go on with the story. And he comes back with a continuation of his original post, which is also his final update, and he did this 9 days later. He says, sorry about that, folks. I had to end things abruptly last time because my battery was dying and I just haven't had the time to get back to it until now, so I'll pick up where I left off. After meeting with my attorney, I had to consider what my next steps would be. Remember, at this point, my wife knew nothing about what I've been up to, and I hadn't confronted her. We were still sleeping in the same bed, but by that time we hadn't had X in nearly 2 months. If your wife isn't having X with you and doing stuff with you, she's doing stuff with someone else. I can almost guarantee it. We were both using her mental state as an excuse not to. She was because she didn't want to do anything with me, and I was because I didn't want to touch her knowing what she'd been doing with her AP. Yeah, and hopefully you've gone out and gotten an STI test. My buddy the PI kept digging and through our cell phone records was able to determine that she had been phoning and texting this guy on the daily starting 4 months before we got married. It seems they didn't switch to using Signal until after I proposed because the texts were suddenly stopped. So that's interesting. So she was texting back and forth with this guy early on in their affair, but then took it underground on this Signal after he proposed to her because she was probably saying, oh man, I really don't want to get caught. Interesting. He didn't have any detail, only dates and times of the texts and the calls. There were tons of texts, sometimes 40 or more a day. Obviously not work stuff. I don't know when she was doing this, as I rarely saw her texting or heard her phone going off. One thing my buddy noticed from the invoices is that she got a new phone 6 months ago. I told him that was correct. I bought it for her. He asked if we still had the old one, and I said it's probably laying around somewhere. He told me to find it pronto. I ended up finding it in the top drawer of her nightstand. I was able to charge it and get into it using her old password. There I found old text of her and her AP from months ago that confirmed everything. There you go. I gave the phone to my buddy to check as I didn't want to read any more of them. He came back later that day and told me that my wife and her AP were scheming to get my lottery winnings. He said she had been cheating on me before I proposed and was planning on leaving me before I won the lottery. Oh wow, what a terrible person. He says they decided it would be best for them if she married me in order to claim stake my money. They even discussed her making small withdrawals, but she didn't know how to do it through Schwab. Reflecting back now, I feel like such a fool. As a coincidence, she approached me that same evening and asked if I was happy. I told her I wasn't and wanted out. She told me she did too. I told her we should get divorced, and she fake cried and said she was sorry things didn't work out for us, but it was probably best. It's interesting that he says she fake cried because that's exactly what she did. The whole time she was crying, I didn't offer her any comfort and didn't say anything. I just told her I'd file and she should get an attorney. After that, we went to bed and didn't talk about it. 2 days later, my attorney served her at work right before her shift ended. She went crazy and called me to ask why I did that, as she was embarrassed in front of her coworkers. I put the blame on my attorney and said I had nothing to do with it, even though I told him to do it. After living there a couple more weeks, I couldn't take it and decided to move out and back in with my parents. She stayed at the apartment and planned to live there at least through the end of the lease and was going to see if she could get a roommate as she wanted to renew but couldn't afford it on her own. I told my parents and brother about everything and they were very supportive. A few weeks later, the day of our first hearing came. My attorney addressed the judge and said we were filing this case due to irreconcilable differences as a result of infidelity which predated our marriage. Now remember, his wife knows nothing about the fact that he knows that she's been cheating. When he said that, I looked over at my soon-to-be ex, and I swear I saw all the blood drain from her face. Her attorney leaned in, and they were talking, and my wife was shaking her head no. She glanced back at her mother and did the same, and then glanced over my way. I just raised my eyebrows and turned back to face the judge. My attorney told the judge that we wanted the infidelity to be considered when determining the asset division because it predated our marriage and was a premeditated act of deception, and we had proof of it. The judge asked for statements of all of our accounts, and my attorney asked to approach the bench and gave them to the judge. My attorney explained that the Schwab account and my 401k were open prior to our marriage and that my wife's name wasn't on either account. Only my name was on the account, with my parents as beneficiaries were listed. My attorney then told the judge we had written evidence to show it was my wife's intent to marry me for the sole purpose of getting a share of my accounts, specifically the Schwab account, funded with my lottery winnings. The judge then turned to my wife's attorney and she started off by saying my wife completely denies any affair and considered our accusations slanderous. My attorney interrupted and told her the judge has in his possession texts and pictures that prove otherwise. The judge spoke up and shut my attorney down and instructed her attorney to continue on. She claimed my wife has been a loyal and loving wife, and that the reason for our divorce was due to the mental distress and isolation of living with me. And the OP says, "What the?" His attorney warned him about that. He says, "You'd be surprised at the crazy things people do and say and what accusations they make when they're backed into a corner." Here's a perfect example of that. Her attorney claims she was due at least 50% of my Schwab account and our checking and saving accounts, as well as a share of my 401k. All total, she was seeking $56,000 plus her attorney fees, along with 3 months of alimony, even though under state law she was only entitled to 1. In the end, the judge awarded her a grand total of $11,700, $3,000 of which was from an equal split of our checking and savings accounts, $1,200 for 1 month of alimony, and $7,500 for some arbitrary calculation he came up with to cover her expenses for 90 days. So even though she cheated and they were married for less than 2 years and she schemed to get her hands on this guy's money, she still ends up getting $11,700, which is a lot of money. The OP says, since she cheated, I don't think she should have gotten anything, but my attorney told me we made out well, as the judge could have given her a lot more. In all, the whole ordeal cost me over $21,000, which includes her settlement, my attorney fees, and the PI work my buddy did. I also had to buy some additional furniture for my new place, so add another $2,000 to that. That's okay though, as I'm so relieved to put this behind me. I've set a goal to save all that money back within 24 months, which I should be able to do since I don't have to support her ass anymore. So he's happy to be rid of her, which I can't blame him. I haven't seen or spoken to my wife since the hearing, but she did leave me a message the other day asking if we could meet. Now listen to this. She said she's been having strong feelings for me and wanted to see if there was any possibility of us getting back together. The OP says, I kid you not. She had the gall to say that after what she put me through. I thought to myself, woman, are you freaking crazy? My attorney warned me she'd probably do this, but I told him there's no way. How could someone be so self-unaware? Well, you know why? Because she's a narcissist. He says, I've never felt better in my life, and there's no way I'd ever have anything to do with her no matter what she offered me. Another crazy thing about this is that right after the divorce hearing, my buddy, the PI, made a visit to my wife's company and gave proof of her affair to the HR department. I guess they don't have a problem with employees having relationships as long as they don't work together, but they do have issues with employees leaving work early to have X. He got canned for that, but my ex still works there. So the AP got canned, I'm assuming because he was a supervisor and he was the one that was leaving early to hook up with her, but she's still working there. The OP says, I think she should have gotten fired too because she knew, but who cares at this point? My buddy also notified the AP's girlfriend and she ended up throwing him out. After that, he moved in with my ex and that lasted all of a month. I found this out from talking with one of her friends. Her friend told me then that my ex regretted our divorce and realizes she made a big mistake. The following evening was when she called and left that ridiculous message asking if there was a chance for us. So you see what her motive was there. She was about ready to get tossed out of her apartment because she wasn't renewing the lease and she probably didn't have anywhere else to go. So she probably thought, let me give my ex-husband a call. Maybe he's softened up by now, or maybe he'll float me some money. Don't do it. You already gave her $11,700. Her desire to reconnect wasn't out of love or anything. I think it was due to her lease expiring and not having money to continue to renew it. Bingo, that's what it was. She needs someone to pay her bills like I was. What a conniving little bee, he says. I can't believe I fell for her tricks, but I'll never do something like that again. I'll be more careful next time if there is a next time. And that's the end of his story. And there are a lot of lessons that were learned in this story or can be learned from this story. I mean, this guy made a lot of mistakes up front. Now, he did handle things right in the end by quickly taking action, hiring the PI, and then once he got the evidence, moving straight to divorce and cutting her off. He did that well, but again, he made a lot of mistakes up front. But now I want to take a look at what I think are some of the key morals of the story. The first one. Safeguard your assets before entering into any legal contract. And marriage is one of the biggest legal contracts that anyone can get into. Next, have an exit plan. People put all their energy towards getting into relationships without any thought of getting out of them. You know, people are so in love, they're so infatuated, they're not thinking, hey, this is never going to end, this is going to go on forever. But as you know, in the United States, I think we're over 50% divorce rates now, so you got to prepare for that. Next, watch out for red flags and start compiling evidence. Now, to his credit, he was on to her pretty early, but you got to watch that very closely. Next, take note of sudden behavior changes, specifically changes in intimacy and mood swings. Those are two of the biggest red flags that a cheater is going to give you. Next, never tolerate any level of disrespect from anyone. Life is too short. Next, angels become devils when money is involved. And you saw the claws come out here and the horns come out here. Once he told her, hey, I won the lottery and I want to marry you. Now, she was cheating on him, was going to leave him, but she says, oh, you won the lottery? Yes, I'll marry you. So she was scheming and dreaming of getting her hands on his pile of cash, running off with her boyfriend, her lover. But thankfully, that didn't work out for her in this case. And finally, there's no coming back from cheating, so cut your losses and move on with your life. So those are some of my thoughts, and now I want to get your feedback. What did you think of this story? Would you have handled it like this guy did, or would you have done something completely different? Be sure to leave a comment. That's another thing that really helps out the channel. When you leave those comments and we get those discussions going, that really moves it up on the algorithm. So be sure to leave a comment. Also be sure to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to this channel. And I will talk to you on the next one.